ready to get hired?
Please! Please! No!
Probably not. That's why you're watching this video, right? This is a continuation on a previous video that I made where we built our own security operations center, our own SOC. So if you haven't set up what we set up in that video, go watch that first. And we'll probably never see you again because you'll have given up like you always do when you start these projects and never finish them. Is that just me that does that? We'll be setting up our own threat intelligence feed and sending it into our SIM using Microsoft's prepackaged data connectors. And today we're getting fancy because we'll be diving into some Python and API calls. Woo! Yeah! So you're not gonna want to miss out. All right, let's get started. But first, a word from our sponsor, me. If you ever want to see me just make videos for the rest of my life instead of working my 9 to 5, please consider joining the Mad Hat Patreon, where you can get exclusive bragging rights and get special colors in the Mad Hat Discord. You may or may not get a chance for one-on-one sessions with Mad Hat himself and gain access to the Mad Hat members only section in our Discord. Woo! All right, so you want to head on down to your Azure. Okay, so previously we set up a honeypot on a virtual machine. We set up a data connector to send the security events from the RDP honeypot into our Sentinel instance that we created to generate incidents on the criteria we had in our analytics rule. Now, what we're interested in doing is bolstering what our Sentinel instance has to use to determine what is potentially malicious in the form of threat intelligence. Now, Microsoft has their own instance of threat intelligence. Cyber threat intelligence, as you can see here, refers to information about existing or potential threats to systems and users, stuff that has to be gathered by somebody. Now, Microsoft is obviously going to know about the threat indicators that Microsoft knows about, so you don't necessarily need to ingest what they know into this section. You can. There's a data connector that you can pull from their content hub. They rename it every freaking week and outdate and make stuff depreciated. You could install this and then ingest a bunch of Microsoft indicators, but we don't want to depend on Microsoft for everything. So we're going to be setting up our MISP to Sentinel data connector, which is going to require us to set up MISP. Now, MISP, if you don't already know what it is a open source threat intelligence platform, as you can see here. Now, you can see their dashboard here and what it would look like once you set it up. Share, store, correlate, analyze, targeted attacks. Now, this is all stuff. These are all threat indicators that are pulled from various companies that are partnered with MISP. MISP includes a set of public OSINT feeds in its default configuration. Now, these are the default feeds that are available in MISP, aka free, and they're distributed via a JSON format, meaning that we have to import these feeds into our MISP. Now, you'll see there's quite a bit here, or exit nodes, or all nodes. So yeah, that's just a little bit about MISP. And so there's different ways that you can install a MISP instance, a MISP server, so to speak, where you pull all the data from those feeds into your MISP and interact with it in the GUI. And it's open source and free. But what we're going to do is use a Docker container. Eh? Bet you didn't think we're going to use Docker today, huh, did ya? Fairly straightforward. So what we're going to want to do is create another virtual machine. Creates a new Azure virtual machine. The beauty of having this virtualized is we can just click and create whatever we want. We're gonna want to call it, let's just say Mad Hat. Mad Matt. I'm just the Matt. I'm the Matt. I'm the Matt. All right, pay attention to the region. You don't want this to be in like South Africa because you're probably gonna lag. The rest you can leave pretty much default. Everything else is fine. We just got to name it. I believe we're not going to need to set up any of the networks. And you'll want to notice here the estimated monthly cost on the right, $70 a month plus disks and networking. Yeah, it just costs you for running. It's resource-based, about 10 cents an hour. And that's derived from, if you are curious where that cost comes from, here it is. So you can select, you can downgrade if you want to. I just select the default because I'm going to delete this anyways. But yeah, keep that in mind. The $200 that they give you for trial is used up pretty quick. Yep, let's save that, I suppose. All right, well, that's deploying. Go make a sandwich. As you know, Mad Hat likes the sandwiches. I like Italian, probably my favorite. Domino's has a real good, cheap Italian sandwich. We're looking for a quick toasted Sammy. Deployment succeeded. Very nice. Now we can go to the resource, take a look. We're going to want to connect to it via their built-in SSH. Secure shell, working with Linux. This is exciting. Are you excited? I'm excited. This is fun stuff. I haven't had opportunity to touch Linux in a while because all we monitor are Windows and Mac machines at work. Okay, I understand and configuring. Understand that there's a just-in-time policy and the virtual machine may be reconfigured a lot. Apparently this takes forever. One of the most painful parts about doing this setup is the logging, troubleshooting the logging specifically. It was really painful for me to wait for logs to appear because for whatever reason I would refresh, the logs weren't coming. We'll get to the issues involved in that later. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? Of course I'm sure. I've never been more sure of it. We are connected to our Ubuntu virtual machine. And from here, we're going to want to install Docker because Docker is fun. If you go to Docker's main website and how to install it, setting up is super easy. You'll want to install using the app repository. You'll want to run these commands. Okay. Move my body. And then you want to install the latest Docker packages. So we copy the next line. The beauty of
walk out the door, you see someone that you know and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
All right, so I've discovered the issue here. So the issue is you can't copy pasta the entire freaking thing. You got to do it in sections. Complicated, I know. But so first you're going to want to copy this without the comment at the top. Control C that. Paste it in. It's going to do its thing. Fetching all the things. It didn't take this long last time to do this. That's a good sign. It's doing stuff. Now, copy pasta the second portion. You want to hit enter after you do that, and hopefully you see that. Hopefully you see reading packages lists done. And instead of getting an error like I got before, doing in sections will hopefully then resolve the issue we were getting before, where we could not find the Docker Compose plugin. They wasn't able to find that, but clearly it found it now. So do we want to continue? Of course we do. The beauty of Linux, you just put in a command and it does it. You don't have to click through a GUI. Very nice. Completed. And verify that the Docker engine installation is successful by running the hello world image. If you've ever coded a day in your life, you'll know how commonplace hello world is. Oh, can't control V. Shell does not like that. And then hello from Docker. You should see that. You could ignore all the errors until it becomes a problem, and then you can address the errors. Because this is just testing. We're just having fun, right? All right, so we have our Docker engine running. Docker is ready to go. And we can move on with the MISP instructions on how to pull up the Docker image. And it's already prepackaged in the GitHub. Under the MISP GitHub, there's a MISP Docker image already. You're going to want to copy and paste the URL of this repository so we can git clone, that's the command you put in, that into our MISP server. You clone it, it gets cloned over, and now if you do a dir, you can see now you pulled it. You have the MISP-Docker or just MISP Docker. We'll want to change directory, CD. This is a great opportunity for you to brushing up your Linux command skills. One of these days, I'm going to release a Linux command list that you should know. There's so many of those already done. I know everybody likes making them. I would love to put a Mad Hat twist on it. After we change directories into the MISP Docker, you can see all the different files that are contained in it. You go back to the instructions here in the GitHub repo itself. You're going to want to copy templates env to env, and you can copy using the cp command. Copy, pretty straightforward Linux command. In college, I got the highest grade on a Linux command test where it tested your knowledge on all the various like memorization of these commands, which is a little bit crazy to me. Copy template.env, which we see does exist. We just did a dir, which lists the contents of the directory, and you'll have to be within the directory itself if you do a cp command. Otherwise, you're gonna have to specify the file path. We're already in it, so you don't need to do that. So we're copying templates.env. The order matters here. So you're telling it to copy the first variable being template.env, and then copy into a new file, and .env doesn't exist, but it'll create it using the cp command. That's just how it functions. We'll want to customize that .env file a little bit. So what you'll notice is if you nano just lets you edit a file, multiple ways of editing a file. This is just an easy way of doing it. Scroll down until you get to base URL and then have it point to your public IP. All right. And so we'll want to save that. As soon as you exit, it'll ask you to save. You'll want to hit Y, file name to rewrite, just hit enter. And now if we do it again, .env, you can see that the change was saved. So you can exit out of that. That's the only thing we're going to need to change. Okay, and moving on, we just want to run Docker Compose pull. If you want to do a pre-built image, you can do Docker Compose build. Oh, got to sudo that. Permission denied. Sudo Docker Compose pull. All right, it is completed. Next, we'll want to compose up. So what that does is it spins up your Docker container. Oh my goodness. Okay, sudo docker compose up. We're going to be waiting endlessly for this to do its thing. I don't remember it taking this long before. Okay, I had to Control Z that because I think it just hung. Something happened and it wasn't working. If it successfully completes for you, you can check the status of the process of the Docker container running by just do sudo, but Docker and then ps command. And then you can see your images here, open on port 80 and on port 443. So what we're gonna have to do is under our networking section of our Ubuntu VM, we're gonna want to open up port 443 to allow the connection to establish from anywhere, from our other honeypot VM or from our computer directly. So you wanna go to network settings and then scroll down. You'll see that SSH is open, but 443 is not. So we're gonna want to add an inbound port rule, or source port could be whatever, destination. We're going to want to do 443 and leave the rest to default. We're allowing that connection to establish itself. Once that's created, you'll see it's been added. Now, what you'll be able to do from either your honeypot VM, another VM you add in your Azure tenant, or from your own computer, you'll be able to navigate through that URL that we specified in the .env file. So if you do https:// and then the IP address, it'll take you to this connections not private because we don't have a signed cert for this. If you want this error message to go away, then you got to add your own certificate authority signed certificate. So we're just going to want to hit advanced and then boom, just like that. Our MISP instance is up and running. Although it said unhealthy, which yours should say healthy, but just as long as it's loading, it's fine. And then the default, you'll see in the instructions here for the MISP Docker container, once you compose up and hopefully don't have any errors, you can log in using, you can do localhost if you're doing it from a web browser on your Ubuntu server, but we don't have a GUI installed. We'd also want to be able to access this from other devices. So default sign in here, admin.test, and then password admin. Let's enter that, hit login, and there you go. This is your MISP GUI. This is your MISP interface. What we're gonna wanna do now is go to our profile on the far right. If you hit admin, on the far left, you'll see change password. So you're gonna wanna do this just because having admin as your default password on a publicly facing server is probably a bad idea. And we'll want to set it to something we can remember. Hit submit, password has been changed. We are now secure. All right, our MISP is up and running. We're going to want to now enable the feeds. On the MISP website itself, you have the list of default feeds and click into the JSON file that they have a link to on their webpage. It takes you to the GitHub where you can download the JSON file that you're going to need. Or you don't even need to download it if you just copy and paste all these feeds. Then in our MISP interface, we're going to want to go to sync actions and feeds. So this is where we're actually going to be enabling threat indicators to be pulled from these threat indicator sources. And as you can see from the actual file itself, what it's pulling is URLs, and it's giving you other variables to allow it to pull those indicators into your MISP instance. So we'll want to hit import feeds from JSON, and you just want to copy paste the contents of the JSON file. And then we'll hit add, and there you go. Just as easy as that. It now has all of these at least available, but what we'll want to do is select enable on every single one of these pages. And there's only 5, so this shouldn't take very long. Once you've enabled all 5 pages worth, you'll see that now the enabled column here is going to have a check mark, and now we can fetch and store all the feed data, which is going to take some time. And while it's doing that, we can set up the other part of our ingestion into Sentinel. But to check the status of the sync actions, you can go to administration and jobs. And then you'll see here, all the data is being queued and waiting and completed. So while that runs, you'll see now that in our home page, it's going to populate our feeds. All of our indicators are now coming in. We're going to be able to click into any one of these, and you can see down below the indicators. So in this case, it's network activity. IP addresses are being fed into here. So now what we're going to want to do is set up our data connector into our Sentinel to now be pulling these threat indicators in. So it's pretty simple to start getting this into Sentinel. We're going to want to go to data connectors, the content hub, and then in here, look for MISP, and there is a MISP pre-configured data connector. We just hit install on that connector. Going to installed successfully. That's the beauty of doing stuff in the cloud, is that when you install something, it doesn't appear even if you refresh using the refresh button at the top. Sometimes you got to fully refresh the page. Refresh your page, click into it again. MISP to Sentinel is now installed. We're not getting any logs. Obviously, it's disconnected because we have additional setup. One of many GitHub explanations on how to install MISP into Sentinel, and everything I read online said that this is a pain in the ass, but we figured it out. And following these instructions is pretty straightforward. There's two different ways of doing it, using the Upload Indicators API, and there's also Graph API. But the Graph API is depreciated. We're going to want to be doing it with the Uploads Indicator API. So following the instructions on that GitHub page, we want to register a new application in our Azure tenant. Go to new registration at the top. You can name it whatever you want, just something that's recognizable per the instructions. Everything else can be left default. Hit register there. We now have a new app registration, and you're going to want to pay attention to your application client ID, object ID, and your tenant ID. We'll use these IDs later on. Now what we're going to want to do is go to certificates and secrets, create a new client secret here. So select new client secret, add hat MISP. You can describe it any way you want. Hit add, and the value of the secret is the most important thing. We're going to need this value, and it's not going to be shown again. Make sure you put that down in a notepad or file somewhere for you to reference later. Adding it to my notepad as we speak. We're going to want to add the Sentinel contributor role to the Azure app that we just created. This allows the app to access our workspace. This isn't perfectly clear in the instructions, but you just want to go to your log analytics workspaces, select the workspace that you created the Sentinel instance in, because we're granting a role that allows the app to access Sentinel. Go to access control, go to role assignments. Within here, you'll see the current owners and any other roles that have been assigned. To add role assignment, roll down to the Sentinel contributor role, click it, which will highlight it, hit next. And then we're going to want to select members. By default, it doesn't actually show applications in here. You'll want to search for what you named your registered app. Oh my goodness. I hate how it doesn't recognize things unless you refresh. After refreshing, you could do Mad Hat and then it'll pull up what you just created. You're going to want to select the application that you created. It added that under the select members. Just click through next, review and assign, adding the role assignment, and it now has been added to the Sentinel contributor role. This is granting access keys to the castle, so to speak. Following the instructions, you'll notice it wants you to create a key vault in the Azure subscription, which you can do. But the issue is that the Python script that you are pulling from this instruction, from that GitHub repo, it doesn't use them correctly. At least as far as I was testing, it didn't work. So we're going to do it a different way. We're going to do it the Mad Hat way, which is a way you probably shouldn't do because you should store these keys in a key vault. So if you go to your key vault section, within here, it's telling you to create a brand new key vault. You can name it whatever. You could follow the instructions there. And then within this key vault, you have to mess around with permissions and adding access to the secret section. You got to go through access policies to make sure that the application can access this. It's just a big mess, and it didn't work out for me. I just kept getting a bunch of error messages. Rather than do that, we're going to use environmental variables within our Azure function app. All these can more or less be ignored because, as you'll see in the Python script, which we'll pull in a second, you will want to create a MISP API key. This is key. Get it? It's key. Oh man, I just make dad puns by default now. So to get your MISP API key, this is the key that you're going to need to allow the function app to connect to your MISP instance and allow it to pull the indicators and then send it over to Sentinel. Go to administration, list auth keys, and then you can add an authentication key here. So once you generate these, you're never going to be able to see them again. So make sure that you write down what they are. You can restrict where this API key is used and accessed from. So this is another layer of security that you should put in. We're not going to do that. Expiration, let's just keep this indefinite for now because I'm going to delete all this anyways. You'll just hit submit and it'll generate a new API key. Copy pasted that bad boy. I've noted my key. Take me back now. If we go back to list auth keys, we'll see it's been added below the one that was already existing. So what we're going to want to do now is create a function app. This removes the need to create a function on the MISP instance itself on the Ubuntu server. We're going to be using the function app to pull from MISP directly into Sentinel. So we'll want to create a function app, do app service. The consumption plan doesn't have enough resources. I was getting an error. You can try it, but you're going to need to either upgrade or find a way to create the app using app service, or even the flex consumption also worked. Hit app service. I want to go to the resource group. All right, and then we're just going to want to name it something that has not been taken. Mad Hat is not available apparently. That's somebody named their function app Mad Hat. That's weird. So you'll see here .azurewebsites.net. So someone has created a Mad Hat function app apparently. That's odd. Let's do MISP to Sentinel. That's not taken. All right, and we're going to want to deploy this as code. Do Python and could leave it 3.11, that's fine. Everything else is fine on default, so we can just click review and create. Pay special attention to the region because it was set to Canada for whatever reason. It'll tell you if something's not working, luckily. Once that's deploying, it should be pretty quick as far as everything else goes in deployments here. That's what she said. Oh, there's enough time to go take a nap or something, maybe make some coffee, grab some vodka. Okay, it's deployed. We can click go to your resource. And now we're going to want to create a function in here, but we're not going to use any of these. We're just going to do it from our desktop. What you're going to want to do now is in the instructions here, it'll tell you to download the entire repo here, which is what we're going to want to do. So if you go up here at the top, hit code, and then download it as a zip file. You can't see the window that it's open in, but it'll download wherever you want it to be. Once that's downloaded onto your desktop, go to where that's located. You'll want to unzip it. If you don't already have Visual Studio Code installed on your computer, you're gonna want to get that. Once you've unzipped it, you're gonna want to open the repository that you just downloaded to your computer. So just go to File, Open Folder, and once you open it, you now have access to everything that is within that MISP to Sentinel-main folder. And you'll see here, there's a Azure function already put in with a MISP to Sentinel folder in it. You might also need to install Python and Python debuggers, PyLance, and Azure resources. If you've never done this before, you want to deploy this to your tenant. And by the way you do that, you want to go over into the Azure section here, and you'll see here a sign in to Azure button. Azure. You'll get a pop-up that says the extension Azure Resources wants to sign in using Microsoft. You'll hit allow. It'll open up a window in a browser somewhere, and then you'll sign in using the account that you created your Microsoft tenant, your Microsoft Azure tenant in. And then once you're signed in, you'll now have resources here showing all the things that you've been creating within the Azure subscription, which was we previously created in that initial video, by the way. But once you're signed in, you don't need to click around in there anymore. You can go back to your Explorer. We're going to want to change two things within this Python script. And the reason we need to change them is because for whatever reason, the instructions don't match what is in the Python code. You would notice this if you sent this up to the function app. The way to do that is just right-click Azure function and you hit deploy to function app. And then when you select that, it's going to prompt you up at the top, what function app do you want this to send to? And you should see your function app that you just created, but we're not going to do that yet. We want to escape. You can hit escape to get out of that. We want to change a couple things, save this, and then deploy it. And the init_.py file, this is the function that runs to pull things from your MISP instance using the API key and then sending it into the Sentinel data connector. For whatever reason, the main function here attempts to load this, and unless you have a multi-tenant setup in the tenant's variable that you are instructed to make in the instructions, it's going to query this, and these variables here, tenant ID, ID secret, and workspace ID, it's going to throw like a should be an integer error. I found that just deleting this entirely, we're in a single tenant for what we're creating here. We don't have multi-tenants, we're not getting that complicated, and there's no errors, it loads just fine. Save there, we're all good. We'll want to deploy this now to the function app we created. Mad to MISP Sentinel. You can hit skip virtual environment. We don't need virtual environment for what we're doing. And then it'll ask you, are you sure you want to deploy to the function app that you created? This will overwrite any previous deployment. Yes, we are sure. And then you'll see here, deploying to app, looks like 4 packages. And you might get an error here if you used, like I said, the free version. This is where you were erroring because it didn't have enough resources to allow this to get pushed into the function app. All right. The deployment to the app succeeded. Back in our Azure tenant, if you hit refresh, you should now see our new function. If we select into it, we should now have access to the various files that we just sent up to this function app. You'll see here, if you hit config.py, we just want to confirm that that is changed to what we wanted it to be, which is MISP key, not MISP -key. And init.py no longer has the multi-tenant portion in the main function. All right, now we want to go into our environmental variables and set everything that is going to be called from that function. If you go to settings, hit environmental variables, we're going to want to add a bunch of variables. In our main function here under init.py, it's going to look for tenant, client ID, client secret, workspace ID. This function, this pmain function, is pulling from config, which is another file over here, which is config.py. So within here, it's going to be looking for, when it does the ms_auth, tenant ID, client secret, and it has to be named according to what this is trying to find in your environmental variables. So going back to here, we want to do tenant underscore ID. The value is going to be the value of your tenant. Real quick, if we go back to our app registration where we had that information, click into there. Here we have our tenant ID, copy that, put it in there, apply, add a new one, client ID. Again, making sure to double check that you're naming it correctly. We want the client secret, the workspace ID, MISP key that it also calls. So our authentication key is what it's asking for. If you didn't copy and paste it, create a new one, copy, paste it. It's also gonna wanna know where is your MISP instance. So your MISP URL. You'll see that it towards the top is trying to get an environmental variable called MISP URL. So in order to supply it with that, you need to have a variable called MISP URL, and your MISP URL is just where you pointed your MISP instance to. So in this case, it's up here at the top. If you, not the auth keys section, you're going to want to schedule a timer, and the timer is already pre-built within the Python scripts. So that variable is also in the environmental variable section. We're going to add a timer trigger schedule. Again, spelling is important here because the Python script is looking specifically for timer trigger schedule, and we're going to set it to, in this instance, takes a cron expression. So it's running every 2 hours using that expression, copy paste that over. You also want to make sure that you add this function timeout variable, and you want to set it to 10 minutes if you're using a consumption plan, or 2 hours if using premium or dedicated plans. You might find that you actually need to set this to 24 hours or 10, 12 because of the sheer amount of data that it's going to be attempting to pull from the MISP instance. Once you've added all those, you'll hit apply towards the bottom, and now they're all available. Once you run it the first time, it's going to continue to run every 2 hours. What you could do is wait for it to run and then go back to your function app, go to overview. You'll see an option here to go to invocations and more. So did it ever run? It'll show you in here. I've noticed that this can take sometimes hours. It says results may be delayed for up to 5 minutes. No, bucko, try again. Actually, it takes sometimes like half a day for these to appear. But if you want to test it live and see if it's actually working and there's no additional errors, so you don't have to wait the 2 hours to troubleshoot and then wait 2 hours and troubleshoot again, you just go to the code in the test section, and then you'll want to also open the log section, but you can't do it side by side here. At least I haven't figured out a way to do that. So you'll want to, in another tab, you'll want to go to the same invocations and more section, go to logs. So these are more or less live. So you'll wait for it to connect. It's connected. Nice. Okay. So now we'll want to test/run this. So this is going to run the main function here that is going to do all the things that send the indicators to the Sentinel instance. It should say 202 accepted. You're going to hit run, and down here you'll see it failed. The function app is hit or miss, it seems. So you might have to redeploy your function app from your Visual Studio Code. Should see start MISP to Sentinel using Microsoft Upload API, because the Graph API is set to false in the Python script. Tenant ID, your client ID, your workspace ID, and your client secret all should have values shown. And if they don't, it's not pulling from your environmental variables section in your function app. And then also URL of your MISP instance and the MISP API key. Now, this is all sensitive information that you shouldn't divulge to anybody, because then they can brick your shit. But I'm going to be deleting this, so it doesn't matter. We go back to logs, we're not going to see anything. And it's going to take quite some time for you to actually see the sticks parser and everything functioning. So you're going to have to come back after 30 minutes, an hour. It might even take a couple hours before you can actually see anything in the logs here. That should be all that you need to get that ingested into your Sentinel instance. You should see that your MISP to Sentinel connector page, so your status should be connected. Your last log received should be like a few minutes ago. And then you will now have threat intelligence indicators. You should now also have threat intelligence indicators as a table that you can use to create alerts. You have a watch list, you have the tags, you have the network destination IP, and then also you have a confidence score, which is kind of neat. So say, for example, you want to look for a threat intelligence indicator with a 100% confidence rate, like this is for sure a bad thing. You can query for just that, where confidence score equals 100. So there's a couple indicators out of the hundreds of thousands that we've ingested so far. The beauty of this is that what you can do is create custom indicators. So let's just say there's RDP events, right? That's something that we had coming into our honeypot. Those security events are going to be logged with an IP address. Now we have threat intelligence indicators with network IP addresses, and we can say, hey, if you see a security event that contains an IP address that is contained within variable is what we just created. We're letting super duper bad. That is a list of these confidence score 100 network IPs, so very, very malicious IPs. If it's contained in that list that we created here, we can put this into an analytics rule and create our own custom detection. And there you have it. We set up our own MISP instance. We connected it to Sentinel, and now we have thousands upon hundreds of thousands upon thousands of threat intelligence indicators that we can use in our detection writing. And they are not only free, but they are enriched with information that you can reference and pivot into your MISP instance and see, hey, why exactly is this IP address malicious? What is it associated with? Another way of tracking the bad guys without having to go out and manually do it. Microsoft's threat intelligence indicators, as good as they are, aren't going to find everything that every other one of these threat feeds is going to contain. Stay tuned for more building of our security operations center.